Welcome to The Pick List, the podcast for curious food industry minds. I'm Julia Glotz, a writer, editor and consultant specialising in food and drink. Every week, I'm joined by an expert guest to discuss the news, trends and developments shaping food and grocery retail right now. You'll get a personal perspective on how business leaders and leading thinkers from different parts of our industry are making sense of the big issues. My guests will also share what's on their personal reading list, bringing you a curated selection of thought-provoking articles from the trade press, national media, and other titles. You can find links to all the articles and suggestions for further reading in the episode show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. Now let's start the show. Hello and welcome to episode 47 of The Pick List. I hope you're having a good week. The way we shop changed dramatically during the pandemic, but how many of the changes we saw actually proved sticky? Are we still in love with home baking? Are we still scratch cooking? Are we still making our own lunches? Are we still buying online? And did we cut back on eating meat? And if so, why? These are the kinds of questions that Nathan Ward is in the business of answering. Nathan is Business Unit Director at Kantar, and he's focused specifically on understanding the why behind shopper trends. So he doesn't just look at the sales figures, he looks at the consumer behind those figures and what's driving the behaviour. Nathan is my guest on the pick list this week, and we had a really interesting and wide-ranging conversation about what's been happening with shopper behaviour since lockdown. We also talked about the rise of plant-based and meat reduction more generally, the impact of supply chain disruption and food price inflation, of course, and what to expect from Christmas at a time when shopper behaviour is more polarised than it's been in a long time. So that's coming up in a moment, but first let me bring you up to speed with the big food and grocery retail stories this week. Former Tesco boss Dave Lewis has been appointed by the government to advise on supply chain issues and help come up with solutions to the current supply chain crisis. It comes as the ONS found that 61% of shoppers have been affected by supply chain issues in some form, either because they've been unable to pick up items on their shopping list or noticed less variety on shelves, or because they had to go to more than one store to get everything they need. Speaking of supply chain disruption, the Port of Felixstowe, which handles about 40% of containers coming in and out of the UK, has been making headlines this week because of delays caused by a backlog of containers due to the HGV driver shortage. Analysis by Russell Group suggests those delays could affect almost £1.5 billion worth of goods being imported in the UK in the run-up to Christmas. The EU has offered to scrap most checks on British food and drink entering Northern Ireland as part of efforts to resolve the current standoff around the Northern Ireland Brexit protocol. The proposal was broadly welcomed by Northern Irish trade and business leaders. The UK government says it's now reviewing the proposal. Ranjit Singh Baparan, the boss of Two Sisters Food Group, has warned that food is too cheap and the days of the £3 chicken are over. He said it was time to level with consumers about the need for food prices to go up and warned that food inflation could hit double digits. We'll actually come back to this story in the interview with Nathan a little later as well. Aldi has announced a new initiative to help fight food waste. It will sell products such as packs of pasta or rice with packaging imperfections at a 30% discount. The initiative will run in all of Aldi's UK stores. Just Eat, the takeaway delivery service, has hit a major milestone in the UK. It's now had more than 1 billion orders here. In the most recent 3-month period to the end of September, the number of orders it processed in the UK was up 51% year on year. The latest Kantar grocery market figures were also out this week. They showed shoppers making fewer trips to supermarkets in a bid to save fuel in the most recent data period. Instead, online grocery shopping was on the rise once again after 7 months of decline. Kantar also revealed that grocery prices were up 1.7% on a like-for-like basis in the past 4 weeks. Soil Association certification has signed up to Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly initiative. That is an initiative designed to make it easier for consumers to identify sustainable products when shopping on Amazon. As a result of the partnership, any Soil Association certified products sold through Amazon can now carry a Climate Pledge friendly badge. And finally, Gary Barlow of Take That fame is moving into the wine business. The singer has launched a range of organic wines from Spain in partnership with Benchmark Drinks. The range is called Gary Barlow Organic. It costs £8 a bottle and has secured listings with Morrison's. Those are the big food and grocery retail headlines this week. You can find links to all the stories I mentioned in the show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. And now, here's my conversation with Nathan Ward. Nathan, welcome to the Pick List. Thank you for being my guest.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here.
Now, you are Business Unit Director at Kantar, which many listeners will, of course, be very familiar with, but you head up a specific part of Kantar, which people may not know quite so much about, which is the Usage Foods Service. What is that, and how is it different to the World Panel part lots of people will know?
The main difference is we work on the consumer, so we're all about the occasion people eat at and what they're doing with their food, why they're eating it, who they're eating it with, when they're eating it, whether it's in home, out of home, whether it's something they prepared at home and taken out. So it's a whole consumer view that really rounds the picture to the rest of the World Panel data. So it's giving the why behind the what's happening.
Got it. Because with World Panel, just for a little bit of context there, that's take-home grocery, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas you are looking at any food and drink consumed inside or outside the home.
Yes. So we look at it in the whole 360 side of things. Most of the things we report on are in home, but we also have an out-of-home element to it as well, where we can pick up food service and people eating out, which for the last 18 months hasn't been so relevant, but it's picked up now.
Absolutely. And I know you are very knowledgeable about the meat sector. Is that a sector that you have focused on specifically throughout your career, or are you actually working across a whole number of different sectors?
I did used to head up a team that was solely focused on meat, fish and poultry. So I headed that up for about 6 years. So I have a bit of knowledge in that area. The usage food side of things is a much more general role across all food and drink, really. So we have a range of clients from government agencies all the way through to huge branded suppliers.
Fantastic. And I think we'll make the most of that breadth of perspective that you have, although we'll drag you a little bit to a few meaty things as well. I know that you have been at Kantar for, I think, more than 20 years. Are you one of those people now who are an absolute nightmare to go grocery shopping with? People like me, in other words, who stop constantly, want to look at all the products, all the merchandising, all the prices? Or are you still capable of doing a halfway normal shop?
I'd like to say I was capable of doing normal shop. I do find myself walking down aisles I have no need to be in, just to see what's in there, see what's happening, see what's different. I quite enjoy going grocery shopping. It's always a pleasure. You get to see different things. And quite often you get to see MPD that you've talked about with people, or things that you've heard in the pipeline. So it's really good to see almost the fruits of the labour of the people you work with and the people we support.
Absolutely. Now, we've got some really topical articles and issues to talk about. Before we do that, tell me just a little bit about your reading habits. How do you keep up to date on the latest industry trends? Which publications do you tend to read?
Yeah, I have a lot of publications coming to me. Over the years, I've worked in lots of different areas, and you get subscriptions to lots of things. So I suppose the big stopgap for me, for everyone, is always the grocer. It's in my daily inbox all the time. But I do a lot of industry-specific things. So from the days of working in meat, I see meat and food management all the time. I used to work on alcohol, so I actually see quite a lot of the Morning Advertiser, and then all the broadsheets. So quite often the Guardian and Independent have quite topical things on this. Particularly at the moment, a lot of things we talk about are about plant-based, about meat-free, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And those are really strong areas for those publications as well.
And which types of stories, other than the sort of obvious plant-based stuff, as you say, that we'll get to talk about as well, what types of stories tend to capture your attention at the moment? What type of headline makes you go, ooh, I must pay attention to that?
I think anything for me about people's lives is everything we do in my job is looking at what people are doing. So it's interesting to read stories that even seem fairly unconnected to the day to day. So listening to how people are working differently, how people are changing habits in transport, in heating their homes, whether things are costing more to them. All those stories are really interesting to provide context to what we see going on in our lives, because nothing's really in isolation. A great example of that is when you look at something like inflation or a petrol crisis, which tangentially should actually drive things, but it has quite a huge impact on people's perception of markets and what they need to do. And as we've seen over the last year, a little bit of a change in perception can drive a huge change in shopping habits. We've seen more panic buying than I've seen in the rest of my 20 years working for World Panel in the space of 18 months. And you see people buying into things that they wouldn't buy before just because they're nervous of what's coming and what the news is saying to them. So it's interesting to see people's broader context, and really anything that affects people on a day-to-day basis grabs my attention to see what effect that could have on the things I do and the things everyone does.
Really interested in what you were saying about just how different behavior has been over the past 18 months. I think you said, more panic buying than you've seen in the previous 20 years. What was the sort of standout moment of a behavior change or a change in the way people consumed or bought food that really took you by surprise, that was a bit unexpected?
I wouldn't say anything was hugely unexpected. The stockpiling of toilet paper was, the levels of that was unexpected, but understandable. I think some of the more interesting things we've seen have been things that have been on the way for a long time, but in lockdown massively increased. So things like shopping online. And I suppose the interesting things for us is are people going to stick with those habits, or now things are opening up, go back to where they were? And it's an interesting conundrum for suppliers, as well as market research agencies, to what that means for them and how they go about their lives. I think the biggest change we saw in the usage data that I work with was people being in home a lot more. It meant that you had different meals to cook, different things to do. We've seen a massive rise in lunch occasions, which is fairly obvious. If you're at home 5 days a week, you're going to be having a lot more meals at home. But we've seen that happen, and how that has changed over time. But also things like the evening meal, where people were really excited at first. There was a lot more scratch cooking, people getting involved in things. And then gradually over time, we've seen that wear out and a bit of cooking fatigue coming through. And now on our data, we're seeing a lot of convenience and practicality really driving those evening occasions again.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like something similar has happened on food waste, where, again, in the early days of the pandemic, there was lots of really encouraging data or survey results coming through saying people are so much more aware of food waste. They value food more. They're cooking more from scratch. So they're able to actually manage waste and portion sizes much more. And then some of the more recent data that's come through from WRAP suggesting that actually we have reverted to quite a few bad habits as we've come out of lockdown as well. Is that something that you have seen in your data, that some of those sort of early pandemic trends haven't quite stuck around?
Certainly, we're seeing trends changing almost on a daily basis at the moment. So the way the data works, it's collected and aggregating comes back. So we're always a little behind the trends. And at the moment, one of the big things we're looking at is almost the big movement back to work since Freedom Day, how that's affecting the data. I suppose the interesting thing there is it's not really affecting it that much at the moment. We've seen out of home go back to a level below where it was, but increase. We've seen people carrying out again, taking lunch boxes as they're going to the office. But because the move back to work is a lot slower than we expected, we're actually not seeing that huge sea change that perhaps everyone was going to expect from what we were hearing and what we were seeing. I suppose over time, one of the big things that we have seen with people are there's been some fads and things that people were into very strongly and are now dropping away. So a great example of that was home baking.
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't escape a banana bread recipe, even if you tried in the first few months of lockdown. We saw huge spikes in that home baking side of things, and then that's dropped off quite significantly. And I think that's the kind of things we've seen is, although things have changed, people have got back to normal in as many things as they can, as quickly as they can. I think normal has been quite a sort of aspiration for people. And we have seen things tend back, but some things, as I say, are staying. So online, for example, is at a level above where it's been before. It's dropped back, but it's still there. Eating at home, still there. We've seen that growth coming through on there. We've also seen things like health dropped away quite significantly at the start of the lockdown, people treating themselves, having more unhealthy things. But then we had last Christmas, the healthiest Christmas we've had in 5 years, in terms of what people were saying about their reasons for eating. And that health has come back over the last few months to actually beyond pre-COVID levels now. So people are taking health more seriously, and it's a more holistic health as well.
It's so interesting. And actually, I think when we go to get to talk about the first article, we'll probably get an opportunity to continue on some of these themes, because the first piece that I was really keen to talk to you about is from The Guardian. And it's the headline, Britain's cut meat eating by 17%, but must double that to hit target. When I saw that headline, I immediately thought I want to talk to you about this, because this felt like it would be right up your street. And obviously with your background in doing a lot of work with the meat industry, but now also having that holistic view of the consumer. I think it'd be great to get your take on that. Just for context for listeners, so that 17% figure comes from a study that was recently published in the journal Lancet Planetary Health, which analysed meat consumption over the past decade. So we're looking at a longer time frame than what we've just been talking about here. And it's based on data from the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. And based on that analysis, the researchers concluded that over the past 10 years, Brits have essentially reduced their meat consumption from an average of 103 grams per person per day to 86 grams, which is where you get that 17% reduction from. And as you've already said, meat consumption, reduction in meat consumption, the growth of plant-based, these are all super, super high-profile topics at the moment. So I was very interested to understand to what extent you were seeing the same trends in your data. When you saw that 17% figure, what was your initial reaction?
I must admit, being a researcher at heart, my first reaction was like, oh, I wonder where the source of this was and how it works, which is terrible, really. My second reaction was, I'm not entirely sure we've seen that level of meat reduction personally. The devil's in the detail and all of these things. So in terms of red meat, there has been a reduction. I think the important thing that comes through for me is there's definitely been some reduction in red meat, and specifically in certain occasions. So we've seen things like the Sunday roast really drop away in the long term. So those areas we've seen volume come out of the market over the long term. But when you add in things like fish and chicken consumption, you see a slightly different picture. I would say that there has been a drop in meat consumption, but not to the level we're seeing here. And I think that's probably driven by, you probably need to look at a broader meat consumption as well. So we quite often talk about primary, so your raw meat that you have to cook, put in a sauce, or put with meat and potatoes, or those kind of dishes are what people normally talk about. But over the long term, and when we talk decades, you see the rise of things like ready meals, pizzas, and other more convenient foods which contain meat, but aren't effectively 100% meat. So we may see actually a decline in consumption, but it's not as conscious as people perhaps think. It's more there's movement into these other markets. So a lot of the things we've talked about over the years are around cuisines and dishes, and people being more adventurous with how they cook, moving away from meat and two potatoes effectively to, I don't know, a curry, to a stir fry, those kind of things. And that drives necessarily less meat consumption because it's a section of a dish rather than the focus of the dish. So there is an element there that, yes, in some areas we have seen that go down. But I think in many cases, it's not as conscious a decision as we think. It's not all about reducing the amount of meat we take in.
I think that's such an interesting point you raised there, because I suppose, yes, that's where you could get your reduction in terms of grams consumed per person per day. But as you say, it's not a conscious decision to say, I don't want to eat meat for dinner or for lunch. It's just that I'm choosing a recipe, I'm choosing a dish that naturally doesn't contain the same weight of meat as a different dish. I feel like this is an area that can feel really confusing for people who are observing the market, because it does feel like we're seeing lots of contradictory headlines about meat consumption and about plant-based. So there's lots of buzz around plant-based. We've just had the announcement of the new McPlant burger from McDonald's this week. I think there was a survey recently claiming 20% of UK children are vegan or want to be vegan. And then, you look at some of the big yearly reports from publications like The Grocer, and you see meat products were some of the fastest growing products in all of grocery in 2020. And I think people look at that in combination and go, how can that all be true at the same time? Are we somewhere massively overplaying some of these trends, or are we misinterpreting them? Why do you think we are seeing such contradictory messages around the growth of plant-based, around what's happening with meat consumption, and how should we make sense of them?
I think it's a simple question of scale to start off with. So plant-based and meat substitutes within that have grown massively over the last few years. They've gone into different markets, different formats. There's been real innovation there. And they've had a lot of support in the media from retailers to do that. And the marketing of them has been really strong. I think what we're seeing as well is they're quality products as well that people want to eat. And that's probably the biggest driver of the growth, is they've got more space in store, more mental availability, but also more physical availability. And the products are across a lot of markets for a lot of things. So you can have a sliced cooked meat replacement, meal replacement, or you could go all the way through to a plant-based beef substitute, and everything in between. I even saw some vegan ribs the other day, which, as you say, I went down the aisle and could not resist buying. Just to test them, and they were pretty good, to be honest. And I think that's the big thing. So there are good products within there, and they've shown really strong growth over the last 5 years. What we've also seen at the same time is that meat has held its own. So it's declining in terms of share in that market as plant-based increases, but it's still very strong. So it still has a huge penetration of our daily diets. And I think that's the issue, is the scale of decline is always going to be dwarfed by the percentage growth from something like plant-based. So if we say, and this is a made-up figure, but say we see a 3% decline in meat, that would equate to like a 200% growth in plant-based almost. It is confusing, and you see these really contradictory areas within there. The most interesting thing is for us, and using the data set I work with as an example, is you start to see people using food in a different way. So when you're talking about the focus of a dish, if you're having a curry, the meat or meat substitute is an element of that dish. It doesn't exactly matter what that is. And people may choose to go, do you know what? It's a very strong, spicy sauce. Do I need something that is a strong lamb flavour, or does it have a substitute that would go in just as well? Or could I be putting just vegetables in it? And I think that's one of the choices we see as well. So people actually getting the health message on 5 a day as well has helped drive meat reduction. People having just vegetables with things.
I also think it's sort of worth stressing that I still see quite a bit of this debate about meat consumption being framed around people going vegan, which I think is really a red herring, because it's not people turning away from meat completely. It's often meat eaters who are simply moderating or reducing their meat consumption. So they'll never turn up in your statistics about people who've gone vegan, but they may still, in real terms, have reduced the amount of meat that they're consuming. From your perspective, how much of this meat reduction is actually driven by people who are flexitarians or meat reducers, as opposed to those going completely plant-based or vegan?
I think what we see is it's generally the bulk of the population that are driving the movement. I think the whole vegan side of things is actually really hard to do. It's very much a lifestyle choice, and it's finding the right products to fit that choice. I think it's much easier for people to reduce rather than completely cut out. So we see from our data that people that define themselves as flexitarians are driving it, but also what has been termed unconscious reducers. So people that are generally meat eaters, they're not identifying with flexitarianism, they're not trying to go vegan, they're not trying to go veggie, they're just eating less meat. And that is where the dish choices come in, and where it's less of a direct, I am leaving this category. It's more, I might, instead of having meat 5 days a week, I might have it 4 and have something else just as tasty at a different point in the week. And that's where we've seen a lot of that. There's actually some really good studies out there on that, which we've seen from various people that are putting some almost quantification on that to say who exactly is driving it. And in all of those cases, it's generally the masses are driving meat reduction, because it can't be a small group when 90% of people are consuming. It has to be that large group to have a large scale effect.
Absolutely. I'm interested in what you're saying about unconscious meat reducers, though. How would you suggest the meat industry respond to that and capture them? Because I guess quite a lot of the messaging we've seen from the meat industry recently has been to try and respond to some of the particularly environmental concerns around meat consumption. And I guess that's then targeted at people who are conscious meat reducers, are saying, I'm concerned about the sustainability impact. Tell me, what you're doing to make this a more sustainable choice. If as a consumer, I'm not even aware that I'm cutting back and I'm not ideologically motivated, how do you in the meat industry recapture these people and get them excited about meat again?
I think it's really tough, because it's all about influencing people at the point of purchase and influencing people before that point. So it's being mentally available, so getting the need for those products early within there. And I think that is about good experiences. And I do think a lot of talking about the environmental side of things, the health benefits, holistically helps. And there are lots of positives for the UK industry compared to other countries' industries that perhaps are things that can be pushed harder to talk about. I think in store, it's all about the communication and giving people options and inspiration. It's really hard to sort of see what to do with some products, and people lack experience and have small repertoires of what they cook. So giving them that support and that in-depth sort of expertise that the industry has is great. So we've seen some great examples over the years of retailers trying this. So a good example actually would be some of the Tesco food love stories that were a couple of years ago. They're great examples of above the line and then in-store activation of something. So you'd see things like the young man getting his father to date again and get him to cook steaks. And when you went in store, you'd see that, you see the whole meal there, all of the items within it on an end. Some of them perhaps on promotion, all of these things helping people to go, yeah, I can do this and I can buy into those products. And what we did see was there was some very short-term strong uplifts within those areas. And I think it was a very successful creative for driving some of those behaviours. But it's hard to constantly do that, because one of the things we know is that people do very easily transfer back to the old favourites and stick with what they know.
I suppose we also hear a lot about this less but better mantra, particularly in the context of meat consumption. Are you seeing any evidence in your data that people are starting to make that switch, that they are thinking about choosing better meat? And are you getting any indications of what consumers actually think might make meat better?
I think that's a really hard subject for our data. What we have seen over time is people have traded up within the markets, but it's really hard to say whether that is about premium quality or whether that's about a perception of premiumization, that it will be tastier, it will be of a higher quality. So we've not been able to pull that apart very easily, to be honest. And I think some of the claims are actually really hard for consumers. I think it's simplifying some of those areas. So a great example, which I've talked about before, is something like when you talk about pork, the message of outdoor bred or outdoor reared, which, unless you really understand the nuances of it and get it explained, is a really hard concept for a consumer who's spending a few seconds at a fixture to go, is that important? Isn't that? So I think one of the big things that we've talked about in the past is making it really simple and really clear what the better quality things are and why. And there's a lot of things from accreditation schemes all the way through to one of the other articles I was looking at when preparing for this was around actually getting green labeling to say what green credentials products have. All of those things fit within that quality, better for you, better for the environment. And I think it's really difficult because there are mixed messages across it as well. So often people default to the premium products are the best products to go to, and those will be the ones that have the quality. And in some cases, that might be just the way that they've been defined or the way that they've been sourced. So better quality isn't always the thing that they're calling out. They're almost shortcutting to premium as a byline for quality.
Got it. And obviously we're now starting to see those Foundation Earth eco labels starting to make their way into the market. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that ultimately ends up affecting consumer choices. Now, I do want to bring you on to your next article. We're staying with meat, poultry specifically, but we're going to talk about Christmas turkeys because, of course, we are. And this article is also from The Guardian. The headline is "Frozen Turkeys in High Demand as Christmas Shopping Starts Early." This will be a very familiar story to listeners. It's, of course, in the context of concerns over the supply chain crisis and labour shortages. We've heard from poultry producers warning that there may not be enough turkeys this Christmas. There have been similar warnings about pigs in blankets. And so many shoppers have been put on high alert and have started to stock up now. This particular piece quotes Aldi, and they're saying they're currently selling 1,500 turkey crowns a day, which is 4 times the usual rate for this time of year. And of course, other Christmas-specific items at other retailers are also flying off the shelves already. Nathan, I was really intrigued to see you pick this article. It's obviously highly topical, but I wondered to what extent that sort of stocking up early was already coming through in your data. And what you felt were the key points we should be taking from it.
I think this is a really interesting one because we've been talking a lot about what sort of Christmas we're going to have this year. And I think it's the hardest one that we've had for a long time to forecast. And there's almost 2 schools of thought on it in our business and actually within our clients is that we've talked about the sort of roaring 20s where people are coming back and trying to really have a blowout for Christmas. And I think that is one thing we might see. But there's also a sort of subplot on that of actually we're probably in the most polarised economic position we've been for a long time. So there'll be some people that are really struggling at Christmas and finding it quite difficult. So we're expecting to see almost that polarisation come through in how people shop. So those people that have more disposable income, we wouldn't be surprised if they followed pretty much what we saw in 2019. So the Christmas day and Christmas period aligns to a similar part of the week, so around the weekend. So we expect late shopping, people buying a lot of the fresh products, getting them delivered to store for Christmas Eve or the day before, and really buying that sort of party atmosphere that people have been looking for. And we expect to see gathering sizes go up as people are able to invite people over this Christmas and able to do that a lot more. The flip side is those people that are harder pushed, and that's a significant proportion of the population at the moment, they might find it a lot harder. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this article is frozen has always been a shorthand for either convenience or for lower prices. We expect to see actually some people also taking advantage of the fact that there may be a crisis in actual delivery and demand outstripping supply of these products. So some people getting in early on those products. I thought it was really interesting seeing as well the flip side of Waitrose, seeing their fresh ordering going through the roof and being significantly above as well. So it's kind of showing that polarization coming through as we see people getting their premium turkeys, but also at the same time buying the frozen ones to make sure that they've got that in stock now before supply problems hit. And I think that was the interesting part of the article for me is it's almost a mixture of multiple things. People are worried about the economy and what they're going to have at Christmas to spend. But at the same time, there's people worried about there actually not being turkeys and this not being the special Christmas that they want, not being that big celebratory blowout that people have been looking forward to. And I think it's really important for us to keep our eyes and ears to the ground on what's happening for this. And one of the things we've already started to see is people are starting to think about Christmas earlier than perhaps normal. And it's true when you go in store, the Christmas things are almost already out in some places. It used to be that the seasonal aisle didn't get filled until Halloween had gone, but we're already seeing Christmas aisles starting to come out and a lot of things in store already for Christmas. So I think the retailers are preparing early as well. And it's the classic cycle of if there's a physical availability, the sales do come as well. So once it's in store, we start to see that. It's the classic Cadbury's cream egg surge in January.
And I think turkey is such an interesting example because it is the Christmas meat in this country. Do you think these shortages or concerns about shortages that shoppers are being told about will encourage some people to experiment with other meats this Christmas?
I think it's always an interesting one because one of the things we always say is that turkey is never as big as people think. So everyone thinks that everyone buys it, but actually only about a fifth to a quarter of the population buy a turkey at Christmas. And that's because many people entertain. I think the big thing we see is actually around that, and we've talked about it a lot, is the weeks running up to Christmas are really important for the industry as a whole on driving those other products into people's repertoires and into people's consideration. I think with turkey, it will always hold a special place and it is the centerpiece of those meals. And we do see a real strength in the category. And despite a lot of activity, it's pretty much immovable in that level. But there are people that are trying different things. And retailer innovation is really strong in this area every year. I never cease to be amazed by the quality of the innovation around Christmas. And you see things like really good other poultry, so things like duck, things like goose coming out and really good products within those. You see some great red meat centerpieces and different ways of having things. But it doesn't always take that much out of the turkey side of things, but these products are important and sell really well.
Now, the final article brings us to prices. Now, this article that you have chosen in this context is from the BBC, and the headline is Kraft Heinz says people must get used to higher food prices. And of course, it's not just Kraft Heinz who says that. There have been lots of brand owners warning about this recently. PepsiCo is one of them. And actually, just before we went on air, I got an alert from Two Sisters Food Group, very big poultry supplier, among other things. And their owner, Ranjit Singh Baparan, has just put out a pretty punchy statement warning about higher food prices. And I thought, just for listeners, I'll just read a paragraph from that, which I think gives a taste of how suppliers are talking about this at the moment. So here's the quote from Ranjit. "The days when you could feed a family of 4 with a £3 chicken are coming to an end. We need transparent, honest pricing. This is a reset and we need to spell out what this will mean. Food is too cheap. There's no point avoiding the issue. In relative terms, a chicken today is cheaper to buy than it was 20 years ago. How can it be right that a whole chicken costs less than a pint of beer? You're looking at a different world from now on where the shopper pays more." So fairly punchy messaging. The messaging from Kraft Heinz was also fairly clear in saying that. What do you take from that? Why are suppliers not just looking to push through price increases, but why are they going public and really putting it out there that we need to have a reset on food pricing?
I think it's a really, really tough situation for some of these producers, with the cost of manufacturing going up significantly and it becoming harder and harder to pass that on with pricing as it is. So I think one of the interesting things where the article that I shared was talking about was actually the raw materials have become significantly more expensive. Getting them into this country and getting them into the products has become more expensive. And then also getting those products from factory to store is more expensive. And it's become a huge burden, I think, for manufacturers. And even something as simple as getting chilled products from A to B isn't just about driving a truck somewhere. It's about making sure you have CO2 gas. It's making sure you have that gas to be able to make the product in a sealed environment so it lasts longer. All of these interconnected things are things that probably the consumer doesn't know or understand. I mean, I only understand these things because I work in the industry and I hear it all the time. All of these things going up means something's got to give. And I think in the past, one of the things that's happened on that is we've seen products shrink in size. We've seen the classic term shrinkflation, where got smaller, there's less in a pack, or there's new packs to hit price points. I think all of those things will continue to happen, but there's almost become a point where these suppliers are at a tipping point of saying, we can't profitably deliver these products without significant price rises. And no one wants to hear about price rises, particularly at a time when we're all constrained and things are tight for a lot of people in the country. So I think going public with it is something that they're almost having to do, so it doesn't feel that they're the bad guys, but also the retailers that they're with. It's not making the retailer the bad guy. It's being really transparent and saying prices have gone up because costs have gone up. It's not to do with us trying to make huge profits. It's not with the retailers trying to make profits. It is because the bottom line has changed. And I think the statement from Two Sisters underlines that, to say it's cheaper relatively to buy a chicken now than it was 20 years ago. It seems almost a mixture of, well, we might expect that with efficiencies and technology, but actually when you look behind the scenes, there's probably not that much efficiency in technology changes that's been made over that time to facilitate that level of change. We've been keeping prices low, and something does have to change. And I think it's taken a huge event and things off the back of that huge event to really put into place a position where actually these price increases are having to be made. So it's a really tough position, because I think I mean, I've worked in the industry for 20 years, and in a lot of markets, we've just seen prices drop consistently. There's not been a huge amount of markets where prices rise on like-for-like products. Where things have grown, it's been through premiumization, through getting it into a different occasion, giving people a different delivery method. What we haven't seen is actually the basic prices of the standard things significantly increase. It will have happened in some markets, but not everywhere.
And it's so interesting, I think, also in terms of what this means for the power dynamics in UK grocery retail specifically. I mean, going back to the previous article we talked about, which quotes Aldi UK boss Giles Hurley talking about frozen turkey crowns, but also, he has gone on record saying actually it's business as usual at Aldi. Other people may have struggled with some of the supply chain issues, but actually Aldi's business model means they've been able to deal with that. That is, there's a message contained therein, isn't there, to the big four in terms of the kind of pressure they can expect from the discounters, from a discounter like Aldi in terms of price competition. It's a tough spot to be in if you are a major supermarket, isn't it? When on the one hand, you've got your suppliers going public and, Kraft Heinz is saying this not just about the UK, but saying it's a global issue. It's happening in lots of territories. Something needs to give. You've got that punchy statement from Ranjit at Two Sisters. And then on the other hand, you've got the discounters waiting in the wing, trying to kind of redo what they did in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. What are your expectations of how the retailers, the big four, are going to try and navigate that?
It's really hard for retailers, I think. And what I expect to happen is that every one of the big four will have a different way of approaching it. So they've all got different challenges and different things going on with their businesses at the moment. So some of them having takeovers, some of them actually being taken over and looking at a different model. All of these things will be going on, and they'll be looking how they can do that and what they can do. We know in the past recessions that we've seen, retailers have really looked to help their customers through helping them trade down, helping them through promotions, all of these kind of areas. So I'd expect some of that to come through. What we found very much is that the discounters' growth came through in the years after the recession, because these behaviours last a long time. At the same time, there was a huge expansion of those retailers in terms of the number of stores as well. And we know that's continuing as well. So there's definitely going to be a battle in that area coming up. And I think it's everyone will have a different route to try and navigate through that. And I think the interesting thing for us as a business working with suppliers and retailers alike is really helping inform what their customers want, what their consumers want, and how everyone can do it their own way, and what is their way of approaching these things. As you say, there will be huge competition, but we know from history that all of these retailers find ways to work with those trends and really try and continue to build a relationship with their customers, drive loyalty, keep people in store. And I think we'll see more innovative ways of doing that and more things coming that are there to really protect their position and help them grow within their areas.
Fantastic. Nathan, we're out of time, but if listeners want to connect with you, where's the best way to find you?
Yeah, I'm always on LinkedIn, so anyone can contact me there, or through our World Panel website, or through me directly. So my address would be nathanward@kantar.com. If anyone wants to get in touch, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Nathan, thank you so much for being my guest.
No problem. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was great to talk.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. If you did, please consider giving the Pick List a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're listening and leave a review. It tells me you're enjoying the show and would like it to continue, and it helps me reach more listeners. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at juliaglotz.com and onthepicklist.co.uk. And if you'd like more thought-provoking reads for your personal reading list, please subscribe to The Trim, my free weekly newsletter at juliaglotz.com/newsletter. See you next time.